And it seems like mic is working. That's great. Can somebody on the call say something?
Is this the actual backlog?
Oh yeah, that is the actual backlog. So no, well, that's the first 10% of it or something. So we have, I think 57 open issues or something. So the oldest issue we currently have is from 2015. So it's only 5 years old. So I guess it could be worse. Does anybody have context on this one? I guess who marked the API ready for review? Tarek. I guess Levi will probably be the person that needs to comment on this.
Yeah,
Levi
I
is
don't
not
know if
here.
I'm a huge fan of adding these instance methods directly onto string either, but
Yeah, I don't like them as instance methods, and I think rather than start and end, I would rather have them named prefix and suffix.
So instead of instance method, what would you suggest?
Static methods like most of the other APIs.
I thought most methods on strings are instance methods, no?
Are they?
I mean, I think trim and others are all instance methods. I don't think they're static.
yeah, I guess they are. We also have like starts with and ends with, so prefix and suffix.
I mean, I will say I go back and forth. I guess, generally speaking, when you take two arguments, it always seems weird if they are statics. If they are instance methods, like especially comparisons, because you usually have issues like null references when you do that.
Yep.
These kind of things seem fine as instance methods. I mean, the way you would use them seems better as instance methods.
Yeah, I guess if the rest of the APIs are, I'm probably just crazy.
Okay, so this is not a trim. It's essentially remove this prefix or suffix.
Yeah, I think trim has the semantics of any, right? The char array that it takes is like any chars in that array. So if you want to remove a particular sequence of chars, then this would be the API for that.
Yeah, well, it's not just that, but if you say trim x, for instance, and the string begins with XX, both of them get removed. Presumably, this one would not remove both prefixes.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of. I guess this could end up removing some combining characters or some base characters without removing the combining characters.
If you pass in a linguistic string comparison, that should not be the case.
What is a linguistic string comparison?
A current culture or invariant culture.
But you could pass in a different comparison and end up causing the string to effectively have corrupted UC2 data?
Yeah.
That's not likely though. Like in order to get corrupted data, like you would have to pass in a literal prefix or suffix that already had corrupted data inside of it. So it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out scenario.
Is that true? I mean, you could have like E acute in your string, and then you just say remove start E, and then you would just have an acute or something, right? So,
yes, but that's not corrupted data. It's meaningless, but it's not corrupted.
Okay.
I mean, E acute is actually one code point.
Depends on who you
could
ask.
do it with an overlay.
Depending on normalization form.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you could normalize it to E and then the overlay acute, but so the overlay characters are always going to be able to be in a inconsistent state, but that's just true with strings always.
Yeah, but that you already have that today with trim, index of, subster, and everything else. Like it requires the string to already have that characteristic going into it, which I don't think is a huge problem, because if the common case for this is that you're going to be doing ordinal non-linguistic comparisons on the string anyway. If you were already doing non-linguistic comparisons, that combining acute accent character was already going to be treated by your application as a standalone thing, not something that combined with what came before it.
That's fair. Are these common enough operations that they should be first-class methods? I don't know how often I've had to actually do this.
I actually do it all the time. And I generally do it by if starts with substring.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do the same thing. I mean, my other argument would be, even if they're not common, where else would you put them? We don't really have the second tier of string methods. I mean, ignoring link because they always show up, but
Yeah, we've had quite a few requests for similar APIs throughout the years.
I know, for example, in my pinvoke binding generator, I frequently have to trim underscores and the prefix tag because Windows loves to type def using tag x as x.
Okay. Should the naming be removed from start?
Or remove prefix, remove suffix, but
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think prefix and suffix works too. I'm just thinking we also have starts with and ends with. So start and end kind of have an argument as well.
the problem with starts with and ends with right now is that they use current culture, I believe, when you call them. Someone should double check me on that. And these ostensibly would use ordinal. So if you give them a similar name but use a different default comparer, that might confuse people.
I kind of wonder if no matter what we feel about the choice of current culture for starts with and ends with, I kind of wonder if these should match, because I imagine a common pattern will be if string.starts with, then remove start, and you'd want those using the same comparison method.
Well, I think the purpose
Okay.
of this is that you can just call remove start and it checks for you. But I do agree that the behavior should match.
Yeah, so it looks like starts with defaults to current culture, but there's an overload that allows you to pass in the culture. I would imagine we'd actually want overloads for remove start that take the culture as well then.
Takes the culture or the comparison?
The culture.
Comparison. Does it? Oh, there is one that takes a culture as well.
Does it take a culture and a bool is uppercase or case
Bool ignore
insensitive?
case.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not really a huge fan of those APIs on string because we already have the text info and compare info class, which is a more powerful version of that. It's just less discoverable.
Fair enough. As long as there's some way to do the intended comparison you want.
Yeah, there's an existing API, compareInfo.isPrefix, compareInfo.isSuffix, which is the equivalent of starts with and ends with. However, there is no API in the framework today that allows you to do the equivalent of remove start and remove end, because it gets very, very weird once you start having culture info involved.
So when you say, you mean APIs like the ones on the screen?
Correct. There's actually no correct way right now in the framework using the existing public APIs to implement any of the methods on the screen.
Why is that?
Because when you start having non-ordinal comparisons, a string of length A can compare as equal to a string of length not A, which means you have to start accounting for those length differences when you have starts with, ends with. Which means that if you say that you don't have a remove start API, say that you only have starts with and subster, if my string starts with foo, how far into it do I subster in order to remove foo? We actually don't expose that information today.
You mean foo.length may be incorrect?
Correct. This API presumably would wrap all of that logic for you so that you don't have to worry about length differences.
Sounds like if this is approved, Levi has to review the PR.
Or Tarek.
While doing like substring of the string would be wrong. Presumably, if you did if starts with and then remove, remove will remove the right thing. And I don't know if we have remove last, but you would get the same thing for ends with.
Maybe I don't actually have the API service in front of me. I'm on a mobile device.
Right.
Isn't
Well,
the
I
way
know
don't
that
remove-
we have remove.
We have remove, but doesn't it remove every occurrence?
I thought that was remove all.
I don't think there is remove all.
Oh, then maybe I'm thinking of JavaScript regular expressions again.
I also don't see a remove that takes a string, just one that takes an index.
Well, there's replace. I think that's what I'm thinking of. Which
Oh,
takes
yeah.
it, so you call it with a string and like empty string.
Yeah, that's what I do, and that's actually annoying. Because I
Yeah,
always
I remember
look
we
for
actually
remove.
fixed a bug in that a few months ago. Simply because of this length.
I would use this API, so I think it would be useful to add. It would simplify a bunch of code.
I agree. And Steve, I think you were arguing that it should, if it's called remove start, it should come the same.
Sorry, Levi, you got really quiet. Could you?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there you are.
If it's called remove start, I believe you were arguing it should have the same default as starts with.
I feel like it should. I mean, someone can make an argument otherwise, but that would be my inclination.
I agree.
Sure. That's fine. We would just have an analyzer that says don't call it.
I would think if it should either
we
be
just leave
removed.
off the default then.
Sorry,
people to
Tanner, go ahead.
provide-
I was just saying I think it should either be called remove from start or remove prefix. I think remove start it sounds weird.
I agree.
I'm also fine with Corey's suggestion of we require you to pass in a string comparison.
Do we need another overload that lets you pass in a a compare info?
No, so you would have instance APIs on compare info itself.
Okay.
So sorry, I missed the one on start. So you're saying don't have the start prefix, the start suffix?
We either call it remove from start or remove prefix.
I like the term prefix better.
On compare info, we would absolutely call it prefix because the existing APIs use the name prefix. But on string, we don't use that term anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems weird to use something else because we have already trim start and trim end, and they feel kind of similar-ish.
But trim is the verb. Like because remove isn't. It's not like remove the first 6 characters from start. It's remove if this is found at the start, and so I think the from conveys enough semantic difference there. Like we're not necessarily actually removing anything.
Well, same as trim, right? You may not trim anything if there's no occurrences of the trim characters.
Yeah.
I mean,
Fair enough.
I mean, I don't mind prefix and suffix, but as Levi said, we don't use it anywhere else. I don't know, do we use start anywhere else? Or is it just trim start, trim end?
We use starts with, ends with.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, on string, we tend to use the terminology start and end, and on compare info, we use the terminology prefix, suffix. So when we add the APIs to both classes, we would just follow existing nomenclature, I guess.
Is the proposal for adding it to compare info missing from this proposal?
It is, but we would just do it as part of the same work.
Can I argue for having an overload here that takes a culture info? I think that very few people are aware of compare info, but passing a culture info around is something that people are familiar with. They know how to do. It would make string class a lot easier to work with if we had that here.
We've been trying to avoid that with other string overloads. We've Generally, what we've been saying is with string, you really should be using either a well-known comparer or the ambient current culture one. And if you need something that is for a specific culture, you really should be using the compare info class anyway. So there's no reason to pollute string with existing overloads for that.
Okay, I'm trying to think of how this fits into current code that is already passing culture infos around.
I wish honestly we could obsolete all of those, but they're the way that we wanted to mutate that class going forward. But no, it's a good point. I just think that the scenario is uncommon to tell people like.
You've muffled yourself again, Levi.
Sorry. We can tell people if you really wanted this, call this other API instead. Like you're probably in the 1% case if you really wanted to pass in a specific culture info.
Okay.
So Levi, on compare info, what would the APIs be called? And there would be instance methods, I suppose?
They would be instance methods, probably called remove prefix and remove suffix. And they would take they would have similar overloads. They would take a source string, they would take a value string or span, and they would take a compare options. It's an enum.
I pasted what is prefix looks like on the compare info.
So you said to take a source string. And then you said, I think, value string, right?
Yeah.
Source, prefix, and options.
Yep. And options would be defaulted to none, most likely.
So is prefix just calls it source and prefix. I guess you would go with that. And then we would say compare options, okay? And presumably they're optional, similar to is prefix, where you have an overload with and an overload without.
An overload with the options and overload without.
Yep.
Just why not just default the options?
I don't know what other options are there. Is there a class or is this an enum?
No, it's just an
we have an is prefix method for span of char that defaults the options to none.
Yeah, that's a fairly new method. We just added it a few months ago.
So where's that guy?
Compare info.isPrefix.
Where do you see this again? I don't see this.
It's very new. It might not be in APIs.NET yet.
Yeah.
I'm looking on source.net right now.
So what did we default it to?
None.
Compare options.none.
Which presumably happens to be 0, yeah. Yep, that works for me.
The compare options allows you to specify things like ignore case, ignore symbols, and so on. So it's a flag, so you can OR any of them together.
I see.
Most of them together.
All right, so what I then have is on string, we have remove start with comparison. We have remove end and remove end with comparison. And then we have on compare info, we have remove prefix and remove suffix with each string source, string prefix. I guess the other one would be called string suffix. And compare options, which is defaulted to none.
And whatever span overloads need to exist too.
Yeah, so there's what I'm looking at. There's no span. So then, what is the span one called?
So on compare info on compare info, remove prefix and remove suffix would also have span based overloads with the parameter names and default arguments exactly matching these string based overloads.
And that would be span of char then?
Read only span of char, yes.
For both
And it would
arguments.
return a read only span of char. Presumably.
That would make sense to me.
Actually, we should check to see if CompareInfo has any APIs that return read-only span of char.
What I'm
I
looking
don't
at,
remember offhand.
yeah, what I'm looking at, there's zero span APIs, but that's because probably it's not indexed yet.
So the one thing that could potentially be a problem is what we discovered with read-only span of char.split, where do you have to have multiple different overloads now if the source is a span of char instead of a read-only span of char? Because do you have to return a span of char, and so on?
Well, it's almost like you want to say T where T is spanned.
I
Yeah.
leave that discussion up to all of you. What we ended up doing is we ended up having span.split return ranges instead of read-only spans of T.
Yeah. I mean, sure. That might be extremely annoying to use, though.
Yeah.
I guess maybe for CompareInfo it's fine because that's not really a first-class API anyway. It's kind of like a plumbing API. But I feel like for mainland scenarios, I'm not sure that's the best generic fix for these things.
Okay. Let's just march forward with this then.
I think the argument for using, I guess, ranges is that we don't have to duplicate all the APIs all the time, but
yeah, that's why it was done for span.split, because otherwise you'd need span of char, read-only span of char, memory of char, and read-only memory of char. So we have one overload instead of four.
All right, then let me, how do I share this again? So what about memory extensions? Are we happy with the proposed overloads here?
So these are essentially slicing.
That's how I would understand it, yeah.
Yeah, they're slicing. And if the prefix or suffix doesn't exist, they just return the input.
I don't know that we, did we do trim start of T? Or if not, I don't think we should add the remove.
Yeah, I don't think we did.
I don't think we did.
So the specialized to char or read-only span of char seems reasonable, but I would remove the generic ones.
Yeah, so we have done some things like contains is generic, copy to is generic, ends with is generic, binary search is generic, info of is generic, last index of is generic. Okay, is white space is not. That's good.
Yeah, because for string, for string likes, there's the complexity that the thing that you're removing and the amount that it removes aren't the same. But the generic one, if we have this is just like removing 2 lines of code.
So to answer your original question, so trim start, and trim end are all generic.
We have trim start, which takes a read-only span of T.
That is correct. We have a trim start that is specialized for memory of char and read-only span of char as well. Do we actually know? We don't have the read to. I think those are just generic. But for the memory one, we have a specialized one for memory of char. Actually, I stand corrected. There's the trim start that takes with only span of char as well. Yeah. So we specialized it and we both generics. So it's kind of interesting choice.
Right, because if we're adding remove start and remove end generic, and we're having it be it does the trimming for you, then we need all 4 of them.
Sorry, why do we need all 4 of them?
Because if it's generic, if you have a writable span, you want a writable span. If you have a writable memory, you want a writable memory. And if you have a read-only memory, you want a read-only memory. Just because you can turn them all down into span doesn't mean that it's sensible to turn them back into the, or read-only span doesn't mean it's sensible to turn them back into the type that you had.
Right. Yeah,
so
that makes sense. Yeah.
So the other alternative would be that it returns the range, but that's if you're calling remove start, that was just sequence equals slice, and remove end is ends with and slice. So these are just like two-liner convenience methods that we have to add. So 8 methods to deal with. Like I would say that they're not valuable enough, but that's just me.
Yeah, so I don't mind doing that. All I'm saying is that when you say they're not valuable enough, do you mean the methods themselves? So you wouldn't have any ones that take generics, or would you only take the ones that take literally the instantiated versions of char?
I would do the one that is a extension method on read-only span of char. I would not do the one that's a generic on read-only span of t.
So, but why do you think you're saving any overloads of that? Doesn't the same argument hold for memory as well then?
I wouldn't do it for memory either.
So okay, so maybe I'm missing it, but like, why do you think read-only span of char makes sense, but read-only span of t doesn't make sense? Because I mean, it seems to me that there would be the same. We could just do read-only span of t.
Read-only span of char has the string semantics, where the thing that you're removing can be, or the amount that you remove can be different than valued.length. For t, it's not. It's literally just 2 lines of code that the method is removing. So I don't see adding 8 two-liner methods as valuable, but if people wanted to add them, I'm speaking of, I think that there's reason to not add them in terms of there's not enough bang for the buck, but I'm not like fundamentally opposed to them.
Yeah, I mean, to me the question is whether we need them at all, right? Like that argument I think makes sense to me. The other one I'm not sure, because my concern is when we do the span one, when we do the char one now, then later on we add the span one as well, the t one as well, and then again we have like 12 methods. So that seems like, unless there's value in specializing them for char, which I don't think there generally is.
Well, we have to. The char when A needs the string comparison and B has to do it needs the string comparison so it can do the thing where what it removes is not just value.length.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, we need the string comparison, which wouldn't apply to the t, yes.
Yeah. So we'll always need the specialized ones. I think that we don't need the non-specialized ones, and we can add them later. Gotcha. If people really complain.
Well then, yeah, to me it's kind of a wash at this point.
I agree with Jeremy. I'd rather add the read-only span of t later.
Yeah, I
think they make sense.
So that we only have then remove start, remove end, read-only span of char, read-only span of char, string comparison, and then remove end, read-only span of char, read-only span of char, string comparison.
And would compare info also have these span methods as well?
Yes, except that they compare options.
Yes. Could they return range there so that you could operate on other things?
They would probably remove read-only span of char, would be my guess.
I would be fine with them returning range. It is a somewhat more advanced API.
Yeah, using or having the complicated one return range means that we don't need to define all 4 variants. Like we can more comfortably define just the one.
That seems fine by me. It's kind of a new pattern being introduced to compare info, but it's a pattern that is more generalizable.
Yeah, like we've used it in a couple places already, not on compare info, but.
So, I guess I can see it again. So compare info. What does trim do right now?
Sorry, say that again.
So we don't have any sort of trim methods, right? So we don't have anything on compare info right now that returns.
Correct. We don't have anything on compare info that returns a span. We only have APIs that return string, or that inspect spans. We don't have any APIs that take in a span input, slice it, and then return the slice value back to you.
Right. So returning a range would be would be matching what it's already doing, where we have methods like index of, where it just gives you answers of. In this case, what it's returning is here's the range that doesn't include the thing that you wanted.
Yeah.
But yeah, given that nothing on it is currently returning a string, I think the range pattern definitely fits here.
So then, hold on. Yeah, so it's a proposal then, the one to remove prefix, remove suffix on compare info. They both take read-only span of chars and compare options that is default, and they both return a range.
Works for me.
Yep.
Oh, right. Both is start and end. Okay.
Yeah,
Prefix, suffix.
that
but
works for
yes. Okay, so let me. That is not annoying at all. Jesus. All I want to do is paste something in chat. So it's probably horrendous to read. You probably have to copy and paste it somewhere out in order to read it, but that's the API shape.
You done?
What was wrong with dragging a notepad window over?
Because I'm not sharing my screen. I'm sharing a window, and I share a window because I have a vertical screen. And so I can't share the whole window. I mean, I can, but that's super awkward to use. So yeah, I need to, like, my setup is less than ideal right now.
So feedback on what you pasted. I think we had said on string, the remove start and remove end overloads that don't take a string comparison do not exist. As in, the only overloads that exist are those that take string comparison, because we plan on introducing an fxcop rule, or analyzer, whatever it's called now, that flags calls to these APIs. So it would be weird that we would introduce an API that we would immediately have an analyzer rule saying don't call it.
Yeah, sorry, I must have missed it then. So basically it's a proposal that remove start, remove end. Like, we don't have one that doesn't take a string comparison.
Right, force the string comparison to be passed in. And on compare info, have only span overloads instead of string overloads, or did I mishear the recommendation earlier?
Well, it's our general rule, right? Because otherwise it's not usable unless the language supports implicit conversions.
Our general rule is, you're right, have both, but I think either Jeremy or Corey said these would actually be the first string returning APIs on compare info.
Sure, but I mean, like, everything on string, everything on compare info already takes strings, right? I mean, that seems.
Yeah, but they don't return them because it's mainly inspection rather than generation.
Right. I mean, the remove start on compare info can take both the read-only span of char and a string and both return range. They don't have to return the string.
Oh, you could make them range returning. Yeah, I don't mind that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have the span when return range and the string when return string. It feels a little too asymmetrical for an overload.
Just wait till you see a read-only span of char.split.
Since it has to return an iterator.
Yeah.
All right. So then, anything else?
think we're good.
Oh, beautiful mess. This is why I hate tabs.
Hmm.
There we go. Let's try this one more time. Yeah, that's readable. All right. One down. Non-value returning task completion source.
So this is me. So when we first introduced task in .NET 4, we added this task completion source of T type, which allows you to create a task of T that you then manually complete, rather than it sort of being completed automatically when some delegate completes or something. And for years, we sort of fought against the idea of having a non-generic version of it, mainly for simplicity, because task of T derives from task, and so you could just use task completion source with bool or object or something, complete it with a dummy value, and then just use the resulting task of T as the task. So it wasn't actually adding any anything functionally that you could do. On top of that, at the time, even if we did have one implementation-wise task completion source, a non-generic would have created under the covers a generic task, simply because of implementation details, and we didn't have the means of creating a manually completed non-generic task. However, in that time, that latter issue was addressed. Like, we now internally do have the ability to create that task. And we've gotten a lot of feedback that the lack of symmetry between the non-generic and generic is just confusing, and folks don't know what to do when they want to create one of these that's non-generic. They end up creating, they don't realize they can create the generic one, and then when they create the generic one, they don't know what type to use because it doesn't matter, but they don't realize that. And then we end up with a lot of variation, even in our own code. Some of it uses bool, some of it uses int, some of it uses object. So the proposal is here to just add the symmetry and basically just duplicate the generic API as non-generic. There's a small perf benefit in that everywhere we're currently doing this to create the generic, we'll create the non-generic instead, and we'll save, basically on 64-bit, we'll save 8 bytes per object because we won't be carrying around an unused, unnecessary T.
Ship it.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's been needed for a while.
So I already, to understand like the implications of it, I already created a commit that basically replaces it across .NET runtime, so I can just go and do it.
I have a quick question, Steve. On the set exception methods, we take exception and IEnumerable of exception. Should it also have an overload that takes an exception dispatch info? I don't recall if we've had this conversation before.
We've had the conversation off and on. I think there's actually a separate issue for it.
Okay.
I wouldn't add it as part of this issue. If we add it, we should add it to both the generic and the non-generic. In fact, internally, I believe that API exists because we basically capture dispatch info for each and then store those. That's what's actually stored in the task. But to my knowledge, we've never really used exception dispatch info as a sort of an exchange type. So I honestly have no problem doing so, but we should talk about it separately and think through if there's any other places we'd want to kind of propagate that idea.
Yeah, sounds good. And you're right. I don't want to randomize this. It just came to mind. This
Yeah,
honestly,
it's a good question.
Okay, then I guess that's it.
I did have one question actually on the API. So there's one place where we may want to entertain a difference purely in naming, or leave it as is for symmetry, and that is set result and try set result.
I guess
On the
that
one
makes
hand,
sense,
it's
yeah.
nice to maintain symmetry. On the other hand, and also in the not really meant for public visibility APIs on async method builder, we still use set result, even though for a void async method, there is no result. So it's called set result, but doesn't take anything. The flip side is it's a little strange to see a method called set result or try set result that's parameterless.
I mean,
So would those be set completed and try set completed?
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's go with that.
So that said, there is a minor naming on tasks in general has been a whirlwind. Task.isCompleted is inclusive of however the task ended. So it's is completed returns true whether it's successful or not.
Yeah, so set completed successfully.
Yeah,
is
or
really...
set successful completion, or whichever one matches the.
Yeah, I think it's is completed successfully. So it would be try completed successfully or try complete successfully or something like that. I don't know. Or we leave it as set result and call it a day.
I probably lean towards that. I mean, this is not an API that people will use if they don't know tasks, right? So.
I mean, I think result is slightly worse than try set completed. Like both kind of, neither of them imply the state of completion, but like result, like what is the result in this case?
It's the same thing that get await or get result return.
Yeah, that's a good point, Levi. We really have that symmetry, which is weird as well. The a waiter on task, it follows the pattern, so it returns. The method is called get result, even though it returns void.
Right.
Yeah, I would just probably leave it as the symmetric one, unless there's a strong reason to deviate.
Sold.
Ship it.
All right, then let's leave it like this, and then one more down. Hexadecimal strings and bytes.
Oh man.
I don't know the exact APIs yet, but I agree with the proposal.
I need to figure out where the actual proposal is in this.
Who owns this? Who marked this?
I marked it as ready, I think.
So it's your fault then.
It's my fault.
I think this is the one here, right?
Yes. Yes, that one.
Amusingly, converting to and from hexadecimal characters is the thing that walks everyone through what it looks like for span and operation status, etc. in FDGV3. So this definitely needs operation status methods because they'll work.
Yeah. Have we thought of a more general, like, to and from base?
Realistically, what would you pass in besides 10 and 16?
62, 64. The problem with
8.
64 is what are the last two characters?
8 and 2.
Yeah.
Octal binary, yeah. So for this, what we were really going for here was something that just kind of fit the existing patterns that convert to base 64 string, convert from base 64 string already have, and just kind of punting the more advanced API that returns operation status, blah, 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 blah.
We already have them, right? Don't we have a base 64 type? What was it?
It might be in, it's either in CoreFX Lab or it's in System.Buffers somewhere, one of the two.
Yeah, I thought in the System.Buffers namespace you already have a base 64 type, I think.
Yeah, but it's really meant for like streaming low allocation scenarios, and this is meant to be just like a dirt simple, it sits next to convert dot from base 64 string, Like I have something I'm reading from a file. It's a hex string. Call this API. Boom. Now it's a byte array. Like this isn't intended to be the low allocation variant. It's intended to be the easy variant.
Yeah, so system buffers no text. We have a base 64 type. So if you were to do this, you would probably have a base 16 type in there, right? And would follow whatever base 64 is done.
Yeah, if we wanted to add it there. I think that would probably be for a different issue though, not for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, all I'm saying is that if you were to do it, I wouldn't do it on convert. I would put that next to base 64,
yeah.
And then I would say these ones basically should mirror whatever we did for from base 64 on convert.
Yes, I completely agree.
And I think they should have very simple APIs, like take string, return the byte arrays or whatever.
Yeah, and that's what is proposed here. What's proposed here is the easy stuff that already matches the pattern already exposed by convert.
It just seems like a lot of APIs.
Convert to base 64 string has a lot of overloads.
Holy shit, that's a lot. Do we need them all? I mean, like
The only real difference here is that we're not taking an options enum like base 64 takes, because base 64 has concerns like do you want to split after 72 characters, blah blah blah. Hex generally doesn't have that same concern.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of do you want I mean, the problem with to hex string is it's a big doghouse, right? Like, do you want to put colons between every pair, or double colons, or hyphens, or spaces, or new lines, or nothing, or do you want to wrap after so many characters on the line, or so many bytes of input? And like a super flexible one would have a trillion options.
Yeah, and I think the proposal for having like a hex convert class in the system buffers namespace is a fine place to put all those options, but I wouldn't want a simple API to have to worry about them.
Yeah, and that's reasonable. I'm just pointing out the complexities that come from to hex string, because like right now people usually do this, I think, with bit converter to string, and that one puts hyphens, I think, because it was the style used by MAC addresses in Windows.
Yeah, and it's really
so that's what it was designed for. And then people do that, followed by remove to get the hyphens out. And
we actually discussed this a little bit in the issue here, where there are all kinds of different scenarios for formatting like that. Like if I'm a hex editor, for instance, I want a space between every other byte, except for at the end of the line, like I want no more than 64 bytes per line, except for at the beginning of the line, I want a tab instead of a space, like random stuff like that. So it gets very complex. But the simple scenario of I just have like 8 or 16 bytes and I just want to turn them into a hex string, most people don't want that to have any type of special formatting.
Yep.
I think if you're a hex editor, it's okay if you implement that method yourself too. It's like to whatever you need, right? I mean, this method doesn't do that much to begin with, right? It's meant to do the simple thing so that you don't have to write your code yourself. But
so the existing APIs on convert that do conversion, they take a base, either to or from, and they that base is allowed to be 2, 8, 10, or 16. Would it be better to mirror that here and just make this a general convert array of to target base and support the ones we already support?
I think that would be confusing for people to use, because I think they wouldn't understand what parameters they would have to pass in order to just do simple like hex to bytes conversion.
Yeah,
why would
we were going to do that? We'd want an enum just so it tells people what things we actually support.
Why would that be confusing though? Because presumably it's the same API. you take a byte array in, or even a T array supporting the current primitive types we already support and the base. So it's just like the current API. It just, instead of taking a single value, it takes multiple.
But that's the thing right now. Now we're increasing the concept count just to do a simple operation of convert hex to bytes or back.
Right, but at the same time, we don't currently have things named hex today. We just have ones that take base, and if we ever expand this in the future, because we have hex, we're going to have to add binary, decimal, octal,
decimals.
and other names as they come up.
I mean, I'm fine with just calling the method differently. I mean, we could just call it base 16, right? That seems fine.
I think it would not be discoverable, though.
Yeah, I mean, the real question is, like, I know that we all know that base 16 and hexadecimal are the same thing, but, like, if you're in, like, I just wonder, like, CS1, if it occurs to you at all that hexadecimal and base 16 are synonymous.
Yeah, I mean,
If it doesn't, then they should update their teaching.
no
Sure,
gatekeeping at this meeting.
I'm sympathetic to that. I do think we need a more powerful method to do all the different conversions that you mentioned, Tanner.
Well, and at the very least, we do have base 2 base 64 today. So 2 base 16 would parity that.
Yeah, but hex isn't really called base 16. I mean, it is base 16, but you don't really refer to it as such colloquially.
No, but at least it fits with the other API names.
I mean, here's another way to think about this. So let's say eventually we will add like a base API that allows you to specify the base number, right? Will we actually implement it as such, or will we actually just say if base equals this, call this method, if base equals that, call that method? Because if we do the latter, then quite frankly, I don't care, because then you could just say, yeah, we have an octal one, we have a hex one, and we have a whatever fancy things you want to have, and then maybe that's the one we dispatch to, in which case it doesn't really matter.
I don't quite know what overloads a generic base one would have, because when you talk about base 16, base 64, octal, whatever, they all have their different use cases, meaning people often expect them to be formatted differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because with a byte array to hexadecimal, or I guess a byte read-only span of byte to hexadecimal, you want the leading zeros because you're looking for a round trippable number. What is it like? I mean, you can figure out the same sort of always make a fixed width printable value with to base 10, but like that they don't have a good alignment, so it's hard to actually say what such a policy would be. But I can agree with that. We just take all the methods we have that say to base 64, and we add a version that says to base 16, perhaps leaving off the Dewey wrap after 64 characters. And
perhaps.
I do believe it will be harder to discover, but it's like that. If people are looking for hex, they're looking for the word hex and not the number 16. Is my gut, but it does allow for. We could decide at the same time that we want to do convert to base 8, and because now really what we're doing is we have convert to base, and then all the numbers are just like there. So there's semi overloads at that point, instead of one's hex and one's octal and one's base 64, and so I think it puts us in a better place to have them all be to base and then a number.
The only concern I really have with that is that the overloads would be different, but maybe that's acceptable.
Well, they would just lose the convert to base 16 string would not take a base 64 formatting options, because that doesn't make sense for base 16.
Right.
Because it says 64 in the name. And
so would we have a base 16 formatting options, and really all it would have is lowercase or not? I mean, symmetry.
I mean, that's
I mean, quite frankly, if you want lowercase, you can just call lowercase afterwards, right? If you really insist on that.
That's. But why am I typing 2 lines when the API could very easily just have it be a one-liner by taking the correct parameter in the overload?
Simplicity. I mean, like I'm already not gung-ho about having, 9 methods here to do a from hex conversion. So I don't know, having a bunch of overloads.
It's funny that we're talking about simplicity at the same time making a method less discoverable.
Well, yeah, there's that too. But like, I mean,
well, and honestly, like this covers the very simple case of, I could have just written for convert dot to, or convert to string value and then 16, because that's the existing API, and you would write it as a for loop, and if you want to add spacing or anything else or any other custom formatting, it's just a tweak of that existing algorithm.
So the issue is that people get that wrong today, because what they'll do is they'll call byte dot. They'll basically they'll call toString passing an x modifier, but forget to write x2, and that means that if the value is less than 16, it only gets written as 1 character, which corrupts the end result.
Yeah,
I mean, like it really is like a very frequent thing to get wrong.
Yeah, I think I see that on Stack Overflow like every other month.
I mean, to me, if you just look at usage data for the existing base64 APIs, there's 2 APIs that's going to be used. From hex string taking a string, and to hex string taking the byte array. These are really the 2 APIs that we use by far the most frequent, and the rest is just all in the 1% and less. So I don't even think that we need to add them all, quite frankly. Like, if you really care about,
are fairly new.
Even then, I mean, it's just the usage, right? Because as Tanner said, right, if you really care about buffers or other stuff where you really do optimize stuff, I'm not even sure you would use these APIs to begin with.
No, but this isn't meant for those scenarios. This is meant for people. This is meant for what I call the 9-to-5 developer, where like you literally just want to write code, go home, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
No, I get that. All I'm saying is then why would you not just do from hex string to hex string, deal with the byte array, and just do whatever you need to do with the byte array? Like, why would you deal
I'd be fine with that.
With spans and
we
other
could
stuff?
also add an analyzer that flags you did X without specifying a count.
But it's not always wrong, right? It depends on what you want to do with it.
I'd say more often than not, when you're formatting as hex, you want it as X2, 4, or 8.
I mean, sure. Let's say for a second we do that, right? I mean, I think Levi's point still stands, right? If I have a hex string, like, why would I have to go to Stack Overflow, copy and paste the 10-line, not 10-line, but the 8-line snippet or whatever it is? I mean, come on.
Why don't you know how to write a for loop?
Sure.
It's not necessarily that, but it's putting all of the concepts together. If you get any one of those concepts wrong, then the entire thing kind of falls apart, perhaps in an undiscoverable fashion.
Yeah.
The example I gave earlier of using X instead of X2 is one such example.
So my view is I think it would be useful, but I don't think this is like necessarily fleshed out enough. It seems like we're trying to cover the super simple scenario of I just want bytes converted to hex all mashed together.
Yep.
But realistically, what we probably want is a more general, I want to convert to base, and maybe I want to insert a separator character or control casing.
Well, you
and
say
line
that,
breaks
but like I've not seen any evidence for this. Like, I mean, like the evidence that we see, and I see this on Twitter at least once every 3 months, that people complain about a lack of an hex API. I've not heard somebody saying, "Oh my God, I wish I could do octal or binary." So I think like it's clear that people want base 16. But the question is, could we generalize this in the future? Yes, we could. I'm not opposed to doing that, but I also don't think we need to do it now. I will also say we very often over-engineer shit just because we think we, should do it. But then the question is also like, is it worth it, right? And in this case, it seems we clearly need an API that does, hex conversion, just because everybody's asking for this for like 10 years, right? And we could do that with just 2 methods and then see what we are missing in terms of features. And if you have to grow the method to support more scenarios, we know how to do it. I mean, base64 already has a bunch of overloads.
Yeah.
I think we get 3 methods, but yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think we should actually look into what Tanner was suggesting, honestly. I would probably have it as a separate proposal because I think it is more generalizably useful.
Right.
But if you wanted to investigate that, Tanner, like, I would absolutely be a proponent of that.
Maybe
The separator is
great.
quite nice if they are optional, right? And might be empty string by default or empty.
Maybe it's something that we could start a prototype in CoreFX lab. There's probably some people on the C# Discord that would be interested in prototyping something.
Yeah. Just keep in mind that if it's not one line to call it, people are going to get confused.
Yeah. So if we want to keep this one simple and say that we want to do sort of what we did for base64 when we were adding span, of that we make, you know, a hexadecimal utility type that has the operation status things and you know, everything else under the sun, and that it takes a bunch of options, then I think that here we could get away with from either from hex string or from base 16 that takes string and overload that with roschar, and then the 2 base 16/2 hexadecimal, which takes byte array with no offset in length, and one that takes ROS byte. And I think that those 4 are going to be probably the 99% use case.
Do you think we should have try methods or not?
Given that the try from base 64 doesn't follow good try rules, I'd be slightly inclined to say no, because it's already a bad one.
For the 2 methods, would you have, as proposed here, bool lowercase equals false, or are you proposing a new options class, or nothing at all? You always get uppercase.
If we want to be super simple, then it's just uppercase, because I believe that's what people will want more, and whoever proposed this did too, because they made it the default. And then if we wanted it to be fancier, then I think we would add base 16 formatting options, which would have lowercase as a flag and then arbitrary cutoff points as a flag, and maybe insert hyphen. Like, I would go from nothing to the enum. I wouldn't go with, or nothing to the flags enum. I wouldn't go. I wouldn't do a bool, because we certainly see that there's room for expansion. In particular, though, from 64 we know that there's, hey, I want this chopped, and from this proposal we already know that there's lowercase, and so that's already enough that says we should just squish it to a flags.
So does that mean that this needs more work?
No, I think we're just massively simplifying this one and saying for the fancy stuff we would need another proposal for. Your suggestion was we need another proposal for the hexadecimal class to mirror the base 64 class, or base 16 class if we prefer.
Sure, whatever.
So I haven't looked at it, but I think the base 64 class probably only has operation status APIs, right? So they're probably a pain in the ass to use.
Yeah, they're really meant for like buffering streaming scenarios.
Yeah.
They're not something that you can use in one line of code.
Right. I mean, we can certainly we can add the simple things on top of it on the same class, because once you have the operation status API, that's the basis of every simpler form of span buffer, or of span API.
Also, a fun fact: the base 64 one only handles UTF-8, so there's that too.
UTF-8 has no concept in base 64.
Well, I think he's saying we only took bytes and not chars.
Well, the APIs are literally called decode from UTF-8 and encode to UTF-8, so we don't even have any 16 ones. So
I have gigantic heartache with those names. But so
yeah, look, exactly.
They don't do what they say they do.
It took bytes.
Yeah. All I'm saying is that I think if we mirror this, then we make the David Fowlers of the world happy, but we don't necessarily make somebody who wants slightly more features happy.
Yeah. I would suggest staying away from those names because honestly, on those APIs, UTF-8 is a buzzword, but they don't actually implement proper UTF-8.
Well,
It's literally there as a buzzword.
but I think that they're throwing or otherwise going into their fail mode as soon as they see something that wasn't a base 64 character or white space. So, I mean, yes, they're not going to handle UTF-8 white space. So,
they don't do white space detection correctly for UTF-8. That's a big problem.
fair enough.
All right, so then let me rephrase this. So for this one, I think probably given that this is like probably also 5 years old, I would be inclined to say let's approve the subset that we all agree with, and then that doesn't mean that we can't add more APIs. It just means that we're not ready to do this quite yet. Did someone just fall out of a window, or?
That sounds reasonable to me. Falling out a window, that is.
Okay, good. Just making sure. Yeah. So let me paste this guy in here, and then I guess untriage doesn't make a lot of sense right now.
Also, feel free to unassign me and mark it up for grabs.
I will do that too. So let me actually do this right now before I forget. So you said unassign you and mark it up for grabs.
Yeah, unless someone here wants to take it. I think someone in the community actually already did the bulk of the work.
I mean, I have these in all of the crypto test projects.
So are we happy with this shape though? Or did I miss something?
I think, Jeremy, you had said there's no need for offset in length, but
I mean, I'm fine with having it. It's if we wanted to do minimum, total minimum, then we would say if you wanted offset in length, use the span. But because it's certainly they're all our implementations are going to be that they all null check then defer. So.
Yeah, I don't mind them because it's like the 20-year pattern, so we already have a fuck ton of those, so that seems
right. So the only question was, do we want hex string or base 16 string? I agree with both of them for different reasons, so I don't know which one to land on, so I'll agree with the majority.
Yeah, I think that hex string's probably more discoverable, but base 16 will have parity with the existing APIs we expose and with ones we might expose in the future.
if we expose octal in the future, you think it would be called base 8 instead of octal?
I think that depends. If we exposed base 60, would we call it what is it? Segadecimal?
Segadecimal?
Yeah.
Is base 60 like honestly in wide enough use that we would expose it as a first class citizen here?
Definitely.
Which one's 60? I know 62, which is letters and numbers.
60 is sometimes used for trig.
Interesting.
I mean, I can tell you that chat pretty much universally prefers hex. I mean,
okay.
I don't have strong opinions. I can see the argument for either one. I would say if we only have hex and we never add the other ones, then hex seems fine. If we add all the other ones soon, then that might sound weird. But
I mean, yeah, we're not getting to them for the .NET 5 timeframe.
yeah.
Why not both? And we can just have them forward to each other.
No, that's the Microsoft approach. Like when I was an intern 11 years ago, we had this joke because Apple at that point announced that the new hard drives are being to be base 10 indicators rather than base 2 indicators. And we had the joke that Microsoft would never do that. We would basically have a wizard the first time you ask for the disk capacity, and then we would also give you reg key so that you can configure any other base you want, because we can't decide, right? And that's another example. Like, no, let's make a decision one way or the other. Let's not do both options. That seems worse.
On top of that, we'd had group policy, so an admin could enforce it on the organization.
Of course.
Yes, but then the person who wrote the feature would disagree with the fact that IT could control their machine, so then they'd have the override to group policy. That would be they would try and bury the documentation somewhere so that it wasn't undocumented. But, yeah.
This makes me want a group policy configure default parameters now.
Yeah, so, I mean, I do think, yeah, if we added binary and octal and we felt that we were doing name spread and then we went, why didn't we just name it base 16? We could add the alias at that time. I don't think that we have enough reason to add it. Like if we were going to add a base 16 alias now, I don't think we would add hex. So
yeah, I would agree with that.
I think we should do hex now, and if we later wish we'd added it as base 16, then we can have the duplicate names.
Yeah, and to be honest, I seriously doubt we would ever add binary or octal in the future. There's just not enough momentum behind it, but I'm happy to be proven wrong with evidence.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I know of that uses octal is mode bits.
No, maybe you want to pass compatible JSON.NET payloads to your application.
I guess. So yeah, I'm fine with using the abbreviation hex instead of hexadecimal and etc. It's what people want.
It's an API for the people. All right. Then let's go with this. And then
it approved if you didn't.
Yeah, we approved it as is, right?
We approved it as proposed, but oh, you did add the approved label. Okay. Yeah, so that shape seems 99% use case.
All right. TCP Fast Open implementation. That seems like a big item. Oh no, it's just an enum member. Never mind. Corey, are you still with us?
I don't see him.
This basically the biggest issue here was cross-path portability. And I think there was some research trying to figure out if this could be done on all supported platforms. So it's basically an option for the set socket options where the operating systems have some capabilities which we do not expose via the socket API.
I mean, if we had done this 7 years ago, then we would just be asking ourselves the question of what should we do in those pals, and the answer is probably throw. I feel like in sockets we've been getting more and more. We're just exposing stuff, and you may get asymmetry than the rest of the framework where we're trying to avoid things that we'd have to PNSE. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's the feeling that I have. So this seems fine to me.
Yeah, I mean, like, I have zero opinion on the implementation side, but like the enum member is as trivial of a change as I can imagine.
Yeah, whether Mac throws PNSE, like if it's, because I don't know enough about what fast open means, but if it's something that someone can't really detect, then it can just ignore it until Mac supports it, and if it completely and fundamentally changes the nature of the connection, then PNSE and says, I'm sorry, you have to write a platform check now.
Yeah.
In most cases, the platform detects what's right, and I guess there are rare cases when somebody wants to override it. I think the caveat right now would be the phones. I think we tend to do research on the normal APIs or normal operating systems, and whether this would work on, let's say, iWatch, I don't think we know. Hopefully, it would follow the Mac OS, and again, it seems generally feasible.
I'm saying like if the fast open thing is if you don't use fast open when you call connect, then the server is going to fail. Then saying, hey, I don't actually support this option would be good. If it's I think that this is a perf win. If you can do it, then it's a suggestion, and the OS didn't respect it
Yeah.
effectively.
I
And
think
so
it's more like the latter, that it's a optimization.
Yeah.
It allows you to send more data faster, essentially.
yeah, so
I have a question on that. So the example above basically shows setting a buffer and then initiating the connect async. So the assumption there is that the connect is going to result in opening the connection and sending the buffer, correct? Tomas?
Yes, I think that's what Corey was looking at. Yes.
So that's not just an optimization, that's a functional behavior that if you have fast open set and you've set a buffer and then do a connect, that it's going to send the buffer. So we would need to either ensure we simulate that behavior if fast open itself wasn't supported by doing the connect and then doing the send, or we should throw PNSE, because otherwise it is a difference in behavior in whether the buffer is sent or not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so, and I think that that'll, presumably, if that really is just, await connect, await send, then that's easy enough to have a software fallback for. And if the OS supports it, then now you can do the faster
what are
path.
we doing in other members? Like IPv6 only presumably would throw PNSE if you can't do IPv6, right? So in other words, it wouldn't be the first enum member that we might throw for.
Yeah.
So
No, there are definitely some. This is to Jeremy's points. The only difference is most of those we inherited from a pre-cross-platform world, and we're now being more thoughtful about it as we add them in a world where we're targeting multiple platforms from the get-go.
Sure.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's an easy software fallback. If there's a behavioral difference, we either need the software fallback or PNSE, and probably the fallback is nicer, where then it becomes a do this thing if you can. If we think that there's a semantic difference between them, then it would be PNSE, but that's now just an implementation detail.
Again, I didn't look myself, but from the conversation we had with the networking team, it seems it should be doable for all the platforms we support currently. So,
Okay.
But I agree. We can put it to the notes, or it could be a discussion on a PR.
And I mean, just because we approve it here doesn't mean that you actually have to implement it.
That is how that works, yeah. In fact, that's another scan we should probably do. How many APIs have we approved versus how many have we actually done?
And have some notion of, well, we approved that API 3 years ago, like we withdraw our approval.
We've learned things since then. You haven't implemented it. We want to change it now.
Yeah.
Or change our mind.
Is that a breaking change? Nobody can observe it.
In spirit, maybe.
So just to confirm, this was not milestone to 5.0, this was milestone to future?
I don't know, actually. Yep.
I probably should be future. I mean, we could do it if it's small or if somebody picks it up, and I believe Corey was working on prototyping it. But I don't think we would hold 5.0 for it, right? So
I imagine Tomas would only pick it up himself, I would imagine, if it was going to impact one of the other things he's working on. Like if it was going to have a notable impact on SSL streams, authentication, then maybe it would be worthwhile.
if anything, it would be HTTP probably, where you can like blast the data while you're still kind of connecting, right? And
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Sounds good. Then let's move to the next one. Steven, you marked this as ready for review 15 days ago.
Because Shai had encouraged the contributor from the community to submit a PR, which they did. And yeah.
So what's the API that we propose here?
So this is API ready for review because it's PR blocking?
Well, actually, I closed the PR, but I didn't want the PR to get too stale. They did a lot of work on it.
Right.
Shai basically, suggested that they open a PR, and as a result, they figured out all the APIs they thought were valuable, and I think Shai agreed, and then they nicely added them back to the issue.
Looks like 2 interfaces are getting modified. Which, see every other discussion we've had about that we're scared to use DIMs and that we can't modify interfaces.
Yeah, that seems like a larger API that we probably should have somebody from the data team there. That does not strike me as ready without context.
Yeah.
Also seems to be a decently sized API addition, right? Okay, so let me just update the comment where the person kind of pasted the APIs because I don't find that super readable. But other than that, seems like Shai or somebody else has to represent this.
Yeah, and it looks like what the PR did was just add close async and open async to IDB connection. So that was the breaking change instead of the we don't know what it means to use DIMs change.
Right.
Like, I also don't know that you could add this with DIMs. Like, you can't. I mean, you could say that the close async just does the synchronous close and then returns task.completed task, but that's probably not good. So, I don't know that there is a sensible path forward on this, but at least for the close and open or execute reader, or essentially it's the used interfaces. So I think that they, I mean, the concrete types can do it, but I don't know that the interfaces can.
I mean, we already kind of said the interfaces are dead, right? It's just people keep using them.
Right. So, I mean, maybe the answer is we just trim the interface changes off. But yeah, data we'll probably have questions, and this is big.
Yeah, it seems like this to me.
Yeah, and looking at it's adding 3 or 4 virtual fill asyncs. The public one doesn't take a cancellation token, so yeah, I don't think this is ready.
Well, I mean, it's ready to review probably with the author, right? But like, without them providing context, I'm not sure there is much of a point.
Right.
Yeah, we can just bring them in a future date and have them go over it.
Yeah. All right, I think I got this one right. Okay, let me edit this guy now. only I could spell the word interface.
Mm-hmm.
But hey. All right. All right, so I think Steve needs to probably comment on this one. Task when any, task when all. I guess it's just task when any.
Do it.
Sorry, let me look. Oh, this one's. Sorry, I muted myself. That we currently have an overload of task.WhenAny that takes a params array. If you look at all uses of task.WhenAny in, say, .NET Core or even our internal index, like almost literally every single usage takes just 2 tasks. And so every usage is paying not only for the array allocation at the call site, but then we make a defensive copy. Well, we used to make a defensive copy internally. Now we, as of a month or 2 ago, we have an internal overload that takes 2 tasks. So we special case it. We just call that one. This is just saying, let's make it public and avoid the params array allocation.
Seems legit. It's the same as we have on the 7 overloads of string.concat.
In most cases, like in networking, you either send or receive, and you try to do either one. So that's only we see this a lot, and I would echo to what Steve said. I think it'd be kind of nice.
Seems good to me then.
So I think we should do this. There is a larger sort of question to ask as well, not to be reviewed today, but I just want to raise it, that a lot of the call sites, not all of them, but let's say half, the second task is from task.delay, where it's being used to do a timeout of the first task. So there's another issue that's open about sort of making that a first class thing, where you basically can await a task with a timeout. And so it's probably worth looking at some point, is how we want to actually expose that functionality.
Makes sense. But you would still approve this one as is then, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we should just make it public.
All right, so then we refresh this one here. So then this is what it is. Naming should be pretty straightforward.
I think that matches the recommended naming for this pattern. So, seems good.
Tanner, I think you're probably the best person to comment on this.
This is one of the ones where we need a dedicated review, and I think it's on your list of things that needs a dedicated review.
I think that's probably true. Probably the reason I haven't looked at this because it's not marked blocking, so let me fix this as well.
It's not blocking, it's a nice to have thing.
So you wouldn't do it for 5.0 then?
If it was approved, I've got people who are willing to implement it, and I would be able to review it, but it is not a strictly required thing for 5.0.
I mean, you do currently have it scoped as 5.0.
Oh, that should be milestone future.
Then let's do that.
Yeah. If we can get it on the backlog, I don't think it's that complex to approve. It's essentially the existing API that we already have, except on new types that are generic. That way we can expand it in the future without having to come back to API review for half and int and uint, etc.
Yeah, this seems pretty much like a pattern-based kind of thing, right? Where we look at one of them, and then if we say that's fine, then we just...
We still probably want a dedicated review session, though, just because of how big it is, and there were some design decisions that we may want to tweak from the original to this new API, such as public members being exposed in the original.
Right. So do you think it's a half slot or a full 2 hours?
I would hope we could get it through in a half slot.
Yeah, let's shoot for this for next week then, because I mean, this one is also open for 3 years now, so. And given that we just walked the backlog, I'm okay with marking this as blocking at this point and just getting it done. Because otherwise they will always starve off of priority deprivation, right?
Right.
Alright, so then let me do this. I will invite Jan, the JIT folks, and you, obviously, and then that should be it, right?
Yeah, I think so. And you said we would get to it next week then?
Yeah, I would just set it up because right now we don't have any other big items, so it's all backlogs, but like given that we have 60 open issues, I just want to drive this shit down.
Okay, sounds good. Would that be Tuesday or Thursday, just so I know to be ready?
I probably would do it Tuesday, unless you... I mean, it doesn't really matter, like whenever you're ready.
Yeah, no, Tuesday should be fine.
Alright, then let's do that, and then... Next one.
This one is actually ready for review.
As in, like, right now review.
Yes, it's actually this one, unless someone complains about something, should be a 5-minute review.
Uh-huh. I keep scrolling, so
well,
so don't complain about anything, Tanner.
So
this is just double copy and replace half?
Basically,
okay.
Because it's a user-defined type, there are some operators. For .NET 5, the operators exposed are limited, specifically to converting to and from, double and float, and doing the relational comparisons. Other operators we don't think are needed for .NET 5. They may be added in the future.
So let me ask you this. So
presumably it has... So you don't have addition and subtraction?
Correct. The people who currently need this are people like TensorFlow Sharp, ML.NET, etc., and they're going to be using it as an interchange type. That is, the data is stored on disk as half, and they need to convert it to single, where they will do their operations, and then they will convert it back before storing. The entire purpose of the type as an interchange format is to save space, because it's half the size of float.
Okay, and are we doing it as Net 5 only, or are we shoving this in a compat pack somewhere?
As currently proposed, it would be Net 5 only. I'm not aware of anyone that wants it as a compat pack.
I mean, that will be almost orthogonal, right? I mean, my other question, though, is, like, will we ever have language support for that?
So we had the discussion with Mads and everyone else. There may be language support in some future version. There won't be today. There would be a risk of a small breaking change if any operators are exposed, just because implicit operators or language-defined operators work slightly differently from user-defined operators. Not that the language would be defining them, it would work like decimal and it would just call the framework implementation, but there would be language support, and so you end up with weird implicit conversion cases. The breaking change would essentially be the same as what we just took for inint and int pointer, though, which wouldn't be big at all.
Yeah, like I'm not opposed to those. It's just that in the past, the language team has always pushed back when we did these things. So as long as they're happy with it, I'm happy with that, because it would be very bad if we ship an API now with operators, and that makes it impossible for us to do language support later. So long they're buying in with that seems fine.
Well, I think that's why he left the operators out.
Well, I mean, there's operators with like less than double equals, right? And so still applies to those, right?
But we had the discussion with Neil, Chuck, and Mads, and we got buy off on this proposed surface. And we have notes on if we're going to expose the others in the future, what things we need to coordinate with the language team and have exposed at the same time.
That makes sense to me. Then
So can we scroll down and look at the operators just to make sure that we're implicit and explicit in the right places?
They're all explicit. Implicit would be a huge breaking change for the language to implement in the future.
yeah, because now you have something in the middle that is implicitly convertible, right? Yeah.
Okay, so this implementation of half will require a visible cast to go to float, but in the future, the language could add an implicit conversion that would, or as part of the implicit numeric conversions list.
Correct.
Okay. So, okay.
Yeah. So this is the same surface as system single, system double. System single and double don't define any operators because they're all language and runtime implemented.
Right.
These ones expose just the relational and conversion to and from float and double.
And I assume they're going to expose them in the same way that the language would if the language had support?
Yes.
Because you have made me slightly painfully aware that these types are actually way more complicated than one would imagine. Less than is not an obvious answer. So.
Is it not? Why
This
is it
will
not?
implement because of NANs.
Oh,
So
yeah,
this-
but that's
this
the
will
same as
just
float and double,
implement-
right?
This
Yeah.
will implement the IEEE compliant implementation based on the Berkeley soft float implementation, which is BSD licensed, and we already have usages of elsewhere.
Okay.
So do we
And-
need any other conversions though? Because I mean, usually we have like convert to somewhere, right? Because right now you only have the type. So how does
That's
anybody?
iConvertible, and iConvertible doesn't necessarily support anything other than a strict number of types today.
Well, I mean, iConvertible has the generic fallback, right, where you have convert to type kind of thing. But like, you can still have static methods on the convert class, right? That wouldn't prevent us from doing that. It would just mean you wouldn't be able to do it necessarily via iConvertible, but that seems also
Right.
fine.
Yeah,
But
I think we could
those
delay
are-
that until we have language support.
Right. I think those are out of scope for the usages we have for .NET 5.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, to me, the only reason there is like if we would have them, then ubing them is harder. Right,
Yeah.
ubing the type is obviously easier. I'm just wondering like what's the tail of this, because usually when you add a type, you want to actually accept the type somewhere usually, and then
The one usage which we have a separate proposal for would be with intrinsic APIs.
Yeah, and if this is in, then I think it'll come up when we talk about CBOR, because CBOR does have a specific carrying an IEEE half.
how does one construct one right now? Only through parsing?
Through parsing or converting from float or double.
And since this is mixing a user-defined operator and language operators, can I do an explicit from the number 5, or do I have to write 5.0?
I believe you can do explicit from 5.
Okay, so we don't need int and long and short and okay.
Yeah, I think C# has weird rules around that.
Yes,
Right, which is where you get into the weird breaking change edge cases if they were implicit.
right. Because literals are evaluated very, very late in the game. And what about if it's a typed int? Will the typed int get auto-converted to double if it sees the half operator, or will it make someone do the cast?
I believe it will also work there.
Okay. I mean, if we're getting the type in mainly so that it can be used for, store and retrieve / just getting the surface here so that we're prepared for the future, then if it requires some extra casts right now, that's probably still fine. So I'm just making sure we've thought about the scenarios.
Yeah, and so like, I mean, I trust you that it's just copy paste double, but are there any other special methods you added?
No, this currently just mirrors what we have for float and double.
Okay. The struct should probably be declared read-only, which it wasn't.
Yeah, it's going to be read-only, and it will contain a single field of type uShort or short, depending on the implementation.
And then I assume that this was anywhere that said double D, it now says half H, and all the string S's are as they are in the existing types, and that we shouldn't care too much about the parameter names here.
Right, they should match what we've already exposed for single and double.
Okay.
And if they don't, then we should ensure they do during implementation.
Cool. I mean, like, unless there's any other concerns around this, Jesus, then I think I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but I'm gonna ask it just because I've been looking at ints too much lately. We do call the type system single and system double, right?
Correct. Which is why this one is System.Half.
Okay, just.
Oh, that was one question. Should this be System.Numerics.Half or System.Half?
I mean, I can personally go either way, quite frankly. Like, I know that people hate dumping shit in the system namespace, but numeric types or primitive types seem somewhat fine.
I would say if the language team has said no way will this ever get language support, then numerics is better. And if they've said it's not a priority, but we're not opposed to it, then being in system with its sibling types seems better.
Yeah, they have not said no way. There's just not enough data today, and it's not currently a business critical priority.
Yeah.
Hence why it's on the backlog.
Right. So
my vote is for system because it lives with its siblings. It is an IEEE defined data type. There is hardware support for this on multiple platforms, etc.
Yeah, if the language team has not said no never, which I'm aware that even no never can get pulled back on, but if it's not no never, then system is the better namespace for this.
I mean, it is more of a fringy type, but so are a large number of the other types you have in the system namespace, right? I mean,
yeah, but Emo, think of the poor book author who one day is going to forget to write numerics in the word half. You know, me.
I see.
It's
I
not
see how you
selfish at all.
prioritize things now. Don't make me update the book, is the next phrase you're going to use. All right, then let me just copy and paste this whole thing, change 8 characters. So I added value today.
I think you're deleting 9, so
Yeah.
you have to get rid of the dot as well.
Smarty pants. Oh shit, no, I have to.
It's the comedic value that I bring to this group.
Well, as long as your value is not purely chromatic, it's good. All right, system.
And so while Emo's typing things, Tanner, I'm simply curious, is there there's no loss of precision if you convert half into double do math and go back, right? But you might get different rounding errors than you would if you use the processor instruction directly?
Actually, so the way it works is, and there's a formal proof on this, if you do floating point operations that start in precision X, you convert to precision Y, where Y is at least twice the number of bits of X. Do the operation and then convert back. There is no double rounding error. So doing floats as doubles and converting back is fine. Doing doubles as quads and converting back is fine. Doing doubles as 80-bit precision and back is not fine. And you have to round back to the original precision after each operation. If you do 2 sets of operations and then round, then you risk double rounding error.
Okay. So anybody who wants to do math with these right now, they can't use until we get to your other proposal where you're adding the intrinsics and will this work with vector automatically?
No, it will not work with vector automatically. That support is not slated for 5.0. It's a
Okay.
nice to have. It
Sure.
would not block anyone wanting to use these types, etc.
But right, okay, so essentially people are going to pay the widening cost of copying it from memory into a fat register, but otherwise they're not blocked from doing math with half.
Correct. They can still do IEEE compliant math with half.
So probably should have added C# there. We don't need any methods on and math either for this.
No, that would be a huge amount of work that couldn't be completed for.
Add read-only emo. Read-only struct.
Yeah, it would be a huge amount of work that couldn't be completed for 5.0. Namely because the current implementations of math call into the C runtime, and there is no half implementation in most C runtimes for the math methods.
Plus, I think based on the fact that we have math and math F now, it would be adding a new type called math H.
Yep.
So,
Or we'd have to further discuss the separate proposal, which is move all the math types onto, or math methods onto the types themselves, so we don't have this problem moving forward.
yep.
Right, so then this is it. All right. Then we can do a few more things in 10 methods and 10 minutes.
Yeah, this was for symmetry with comparer of T, as Jan pointed out,
Well,
or
looks
as
like-
Jan pasted in.
yes, Jan just did the before you could move issues.
Yes, the person who copies and pastes is the one who gets the credit, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine with that. I mean, the only reason why we did the other one is, I mean, we ship the comparison type, right? And we have APIs that some take compares, some take comparisons. We don't really have that many APIs that take a func of T for equals or func of T for get hash code, right? So, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, but I think that this is the man. I wish I could use generic inference, which you can't use on a constructor.
well, keep in mind that these are different things, right? You basically compare of T and equality of compare of T are types you have to inherit from, right? And comparison of T is a delegate. So it's just converting basically from the delegate syntax to the abstract base type syntax, if you will. And basically equality comparer doesn't have that notion, right? Because there is no such thing as a delegate based equality comparer. So that's why it's a bit weird.
So this would be making a new non-public equality comparer value that calls the delegates.
But yeah, I think that's what would happen.
Yeah,
And I mean, that, to me, it's kind of like, I'm not opposed to it, but yeah, I'm also not. I mean, once you have two different methods, deriving from a type seems fine. The problem with the first one really is you have an instance of comparison, right, in the constructor, right? Because you have an overload that took a comparison, and you have to call something else that took a comparer. And now you want to just get the comparer for that. So that's why I think I'm not opposed, but I also don't see it as like oh my god, finally we have this API.
Right. Could it take? Because we have an interface, right? I guess its equality comparer is the iEquality comparer. So it's we don't have comparison. So never mind.
Yeah, we only have interfaces for the types themselves, right? Like when you compare yourself to somebody else, the comparers are always they take the other guys, and they're not interfaces. They're always concrete types. I mean, people seem to like it, funny enough, but like I honestly I never had the need. But given that some people said they had this issue multiple times, I'm fine with giving it to them. I mean, it's because I didn't have the need, doesn't mean other people didn't.
Right. What's the...
I'm looking through the issue description, and it looks like the scenario is I have a type like a person, and I just want to create a one-off equality comparer that compares like parts of the person. Like maybe I only care about name as opposed to like name, age, and address that a normal person equality comparer would care about.
Right, but then you just say like, you have your internal or nested type somewhere that is a person name comparer, which is person comparer of T, and so what's because func is the bool is what it's returning. Never mind. I'm like, they have a 3-parameter func here. Never mind.
Yeah, I mean,
the sample code that they have posted wouldn't even compile with the APIs that they've proposed, which is confusing me.
Okay.
Maybe an appropriate answer would be kick it back and say like, what is an actual scenario for this? Like update the sample code to compile.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, I see. Never mind. The sample code was actually for a completely different API proposal.
Yeah, I mean, the last message here of like, I just want to use distinct with a custom filter seems closer to the right answer. I mean, the big problem is you do have to write both the get hash code and the thing. We're making you pass both, but it does feel like it's way easier to. It's easy to be wrong versus if you're looking at a class that it feels like you'd think about it more than a lambda, but that's sure.
I mean, get hash code now is no longer hard to implement, right? You can just say hash code combine XYZ, right? So it seems that I can see people being successful in doing that. I mean, before I would have said there's no way you can implement get hash code in a lambda and not have bugs. But now it seems pretty straightforward. So, I mean, I believe you can actually write a workable thing in a one-liner. And yeah.
Yeah. And Stack Overflow does have quite a few people talking about like how do I make distinct work better. So maybe we could just scope it to that, yeah, like Jeremy said.
Yeah, I mean, I have no I feel not obligated of taking it, but I also have no pushback on this per se. So I mean, if anybody feels like we should just take it as is, I'm fine with that. If anybody thinks we shouldn't take it, I'm also fine with that. Like I'm in the meh category.
I mean, did we actually help the ecosystem by adding it? I guess that's the big question.
I mean, if the only use case is distinct, then maybe we should work on distinct. If it's distinct plus like 3 other things, then this is provide the one funnel that they'll all go through as we piecemeal update them.
Right.
We need to know what those other things are though first.
Right. So like I feel like it's not really needed, and that maybe their complaint is just with distinct. Because there's also a discoverability, right? Like if you're looking at distinct and you need the equality comparer, like is it going to have even occurred to you that you wanted to say equality comparer of person dot create? Because you still can't even do generic inference because it's on a generic type. Static methods on a generic type have to be fully qualified.
You're right. Yes.
So yeah, this is way better on distinct because then inference applies.
Right. So then this is.
You've already been selected by the first argument, but yeah, it removes the redundant type word. So.
I mean, I will say link queries, once you have a lot of lambdas, they also don't get better necessarily. So you might be better off just actually assigning this out to a variable, in which case having the API somewhere else that gives you a comparer is actually easier probably.
Right. So I think it's if we were going to add it, we should add a new static class equality comparer that is not generic, that has the create that allows you to do inference. Or it would be create of T instead of equality comparer T.create. The same as we have with tuple.create, which is a non-generic with a bunch of generic overloads.
I feel like we discussed this for the comparison one, and why did we not do that?
I don't know. But because I think in general we like letting people get the T's out of the way.
Yeah.
As long as it's not introducing ambiguity. So even if we took it, I think we would want a new equality comparer or equality comparer that was non-generic type to hold the create to etc.
Oh, I think I know we didn't do it for the comparer one because there is no comparer one.
Yeah, there might be an argument to be made for supporting anonymous types as well, but if we really wanted to make the ecosystem work better with anonymous types, we probably need language support as well.
Why do you say that? Because I mean, like you would anonymous types would basically be types that where you only add properties and you can provide the comparer literally like that, right?
Well, right now, for instance, it's really hard to instantiate a list of T where T is an anonymous type. Like you have to bounce through a generic method to do it, like your own helper method. If you had a this is where you all come throw rocks at me. If we had something more akin to like the C++ templating system, you could actually like properly get the type object that represents the T and then instantiate the list of T with that, and everything would just work, and it would all be statically compiled.
Yeah, I mean, an anonymous type to me is more like a link thing, right, where you effectively flow them in, and then at the end you just say toList, for example, right, in which case you don't actually need to say the type ever.
Right, I mean, now that we have records in the language, I think the use cases are going to be a little bit more common now.
Yeah, I mean, well... yeah, we need to see how records also play with all the other features, right? That's the other thing where samples would help, because it kind of depends also which types you're composing, whether these things actually flow nicely. But I mean, same with tuples, right? Once you use tuples in link, I mean, give it a shot, but like your code, it's hard to see the braces.
Yeah.
Because there's like a lot of them now. So I end up very often have local variables, which in link is not easy to do. All right, so then we leave that as is for now, and then call it a day.
Call it a day.
All right, then I'd say thanks.
That was a lot of progress.
We did, yeah. I mean, I can probably, what is it, 5 issues and whatever we did. So only 10 more meetings until the backlog is empty.
Great.
All right.
What is coming up next, by the way, just out of curiosity?
So which are the next ones?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what that means, but
I mean, if it's backlog, it's just ready for review by date.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. I was just curious as to what's coming up. Okay.
I mean, 4 more issues in the year 2019, which is actually pretty good.
Yeah. Oh man, the Tau one's going to be fun.
Look, it has pictures. I'm scared now.
It's just very contentious. That's all.
Hopefully it has the line, the
Most-
proof is trivial or something.
Well, it's the name. Should it be tau or 2pi?
What?
The name is the controversial thing.
How
Yeah.
can, I mean, okay.
Anyway, we can get to that when we get to it.
All right, then I leave you all to it, and then I see you guys next week.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye bye.